I don't know about that headline speaker thing. No one told me. We were randomly assigned, I promise you. But thank you very much for, I know it's been a long and what amazing conference. I want to thank Matt and the team for having me here, but thank you for sticking to the end. Welcome to my lecture. And it will be a lecture, I promise. I'm not joking. I will start somewhere, somewhere light. I'm going to talk about, actually, I'm not talking about therapy. I'm talking about a friend of mine, a good friend of mine who's a therapist. So her name is Diane. And I've known Diane for a really, really long time. I first met her, I think I was a young designer, maybe in my early 20s, right? And at the time, she was finishing her PhD. And I was fascinated by her ideas and her theories, which she was also executing in practice. So she had developed a unique counseling method, and it was called refocusing. And I was fascinated by ideas, in general, but also just how effective her method was, having seen it firsthand. Diane's the sort of person that if you invited her to your party and you catch a glimpse of her talking to a friend in the corner of the room, 10 minutes later, and your friend is sobbing into a beer, guaranteed. And she has that effect on people. And so I don't invite Diane to my parties anymore. And so the main thing that fascinated me about her method was just how effective it was, but mainly that it you have in your mind like what you think of when you think of therapy. You think, someone's doing hocus pocus or hypnosis or something. No, like she goes with like a non-diagnostic language type of approach, or what she calls clean language, right? So I asked her, how do you describe the method? And so she said, well, how it works is if you were her patient, you would say, I'm struggling with something at the moment. And then she would just select from your answers or your statement certain key words and phrases, and then she just passes it back to you. And she says, well, what is it about that? And you go, well, and then you would slowly, essentially start to elaborate. Essentially, she's like a guided tour helping you unpack your own baggage, right? So she's almost a Jedi where she doesn't actually do anything. But then amazingly, that process kind of starts to focus in on the actual problem, hence refocusing. And then you have that aha moment, and then it sort of starts that beginning of the sort of breakthrough in your life type thing, right? And so fast forward a few months later, after me first discovering this idea, and I was in a client meeting. You kind of know where this is going. And it was a situation where we were loving the direction we were exploring, and had hit an impasse with a client where they just wouldn't sign off on it, even though they were with us the whole way through. And so it had gotten really frustrating for them to the point where I think we were told, look, it's not working, scrap it, start all over again, So for whatever reason, in that moment, that conversation with Diane came back to me, and I was like, oh, tell me more about, and I basically ran the whole kind of system where I didn't try to project or kind of, bias the conversation anyway, just to listen, intense form of listening to really understand what they were getting at. So I did that back and forth with them, refocused it all the way down, and got it down to the color. And that's what we figured out. So we took the files back, changed the color, didn't touch any of the graphics or images or anything, sent it back to them. Love it, approved it, which is pretty crazy. So this was obviously very shocking to me as my young designer self, mainly because I guess it was such a dramatic turnaround, like to go from abandon it, start again, to love it, approved, in what felt like just a single breath. It just seemed kind of too drastic, too dramatic. So it made no sense to me at the time. And I guess it was the beginning of kind of like, in some ways, like kind of me opening my eyes to the sort of other things that surround the work, the things that we don't see or hear about that actually inform the work itself. So in some ways, that episode was just like one little event or little node that sort of joined with a bunch of others that sort of took me down this sort of pathway that essentially shifted my attention from what I thought I should be focusing on, or what I learned from design school to focus on, which is come up with good ideas, make real great crafted executions, and what I would call like the thing to focus on. And the focus kind of like in some ways shifted to what I'm calling in this talk as the things around the thing, And so, all the contributing forces that influence the outcome. So just a little bit of I guess just a bit of background context. So you've seen my face, now you can see some of the work. This is about 20 years old, some of this stuff. So very selective cherry picking, I confess. But you know, in the mid 2000s, I would summarize, I think, the focus, if you will. Like if I were to summarize that period of my life, I would say my main focus was probably thinking that design is somehow connected to a form of creative expression or experimentation. You know, and it's partly just, I think, the late 90s, early 2000s, it felt like there was a lot of experimental design that was going on, and I think I was sort of just caught up in that, and just, I think, being in New Zealand and just seeing those amazing magazines and things, you know, it's like, oh, this is what design is, you know. And so I sort of, not bought into it, but it was clearly very, you know, very emotive design. I was very inspired by it. And so, you know, I was doing things like, you know, experimental design, self-initiated work for exhibitions, stuff for the film and music industry, which is where I started after graduating. And occasionally, you know, we would do projects like music videos like this one here that I still kind of look back fondly, if not just for the ambition and effort more than the execution, is that it was a music video for a band in New Zealand called Dimmer, which involved us shooting 2,500 Polaroids and then stitching it together as a stop frame animation for a music video. So I'm like, oh, you crazy kids, to try this sort of things. So during this period of my life, you know, that episode that I talked about, and this sort of slow shift to the things around the thing, in some ways, I could almost think of it as a movement away from, you know, the more visible parts of design, the visible parts of the iceberg, to the more invisible parts of design. And active listening, as I experienced it firsthand with that client, was a big part of it, right? But also, I started to also question the whole entire design process. You know, it's like, actually, how are you meant to start a design project? You know, do you start with sketching? Do you brainstorm? Do you look online for inspiration? Do you get the client's brief and then you go and spend time with their audience to build empathy and understand, you know, where they're coming from for the project ahead? Because every project is basically a stack of decisions, you know, and it's not a decision that we make on our own, right? We have our own kind of biases in terms of what we bring to it. Then it's a collaboration with the client, collaboration with our team, et cetera, right? So what forces lie behind our own decision making? So is it true to us, or do we learn it? Do we inherit it? And, you know, is it like in my case, you know, I was inspired by magazines, and I believe that was kind of how design should be. And why do we believe what we believe when it comes to our design practice? For example, I think implicit in the notion of good design is sort of like a general bias towards reductivism, you know? I don't know, I remember a time in design school where, you know, you're presenting things to the tutors, and then they're critiquing things, and they're always telling me to simplify things down, right? No, this is stronger. And you're like, oh, you're cutting all the bits that I like, you know? So it's an inherent bias, and, you know, and you find out, oh, it's less is more, right? But are there situations where more is more, maybe? And are there situations where a single-minded idea is actually less desirable, you know, than we think? Or maybe the whole smile in the mind thing, what if it's a sad face in the mind for some people, you know? So these are the sort of the assumptions that we carry in our work, and it might not have any relevance to who we are, where we come from, or maybe even the audience that we're serving. And so I think this period of my life that started to kind of almost meander into this like intense sort of questioning, sort of basically took me to a place where I had to just take two years off design. I took a hiatus. I didn't know it was going to be 2 years. I thought, that's it, I'm quitting design. I'm just going to do something else. You know, so I was teaching art and design school. I finished my MFA. I was doing, and you know, I was even an artist briefly. So you know, I was kind of indulging my curiosities, you know, and living very, very cheaply, and just, you know, I was very, very happy. You know, it sounds like I went into a dark hole, but no, I was actually very happy. And in fact, it was a very simple time, actually. So eventually, I edged myself out of that cave, and easing back into practice. And this is when I formed DDMMYY, which is in 2012. And it's not like I came out of that cave, you know, with tablet answers and going, yes, you know, with a big beard, and I feel like I know what design's all about. No, I think I had a little bit more of an inkling, but I certainly felt clear about where I wanted to go next, at least, which is not where I was, you know, before that period of time. And I certainly knew myself a lot better. And the name, for what it's worth, the name DDMMYY actually was inspired by the work of an artist named On Kawara. who, I guess, I was going to say famous, but is known for these series of paintings called the Today paintings, right? Where he would essentially paint the date of the day that he was doing the painting, Does that make sense? So basically, what's the date today? It's very simple system, right? You don't have to think about it. What's the date today? Cool. Just put on a painting. And so these are either the most boring paintings in the world, or, as it was for me at the time, a wonderful reminder of presentness. It's like just today. Never mind what happened yesterday. Never mind about the anxieties of tomorrow, how you're going to pay the bills, whatever. Just today. And so I loved it for that reason, and this sort of renewed focus of how I wanted my practice to be was to just be more, would listen to myself a bit more, to be more attentive to my collaborators or clients, and to take each day as it comes, basically, a very simple idea. And as part of this holistic view of practice is to kind of build in that consideration for the visible and invisible parts of design now that I was a little bit more, I guess, mature in my thinking by about 2 years. So to show some examples of kind of recent-ish work where the sort of interplay of the invisible with the visible, we actually do, I would say, most of the campaigns for Klim Type Foundry, who's also based in New Zealand. And it's a real pleasure and joy working with Klim because it feels like the most indulgent projects in the world. So we feel very lucky. And so we are constantly tinkering with the way the ideas are shaped and the way ideas come together. If you're on our Slack and you see the back and forth that we go on, just in terms of just like the micro editing of words and things like that, like it's just a bit too much. but we love it, and we love working with Klim. And so the whole less is more, maybe, versus more is more, is certainly something that we test out in our projects with Klim. I mean, due to the length of this talk, I would love to go into the depths of some of the more is more stuff, but it's just simply too layered and complex, such as the campaign for Signifier and the campaign for the future. You can see all of the outputs, on the Klim Type Foundry Instagram channel. And for what it's worth, the campaigns when we make them is not to sell typefaces, because some of his audience are like the sharpest, brightest creative minds in the world. What can we possibly do to convince them to buy a typeface? Which is nothing. So we go, the best thing we can do is just to have a lot of fun exploring something we're really excited about. And if they see what we're doing, cool. And if they want to buy a typeface, it's cool, right? So, and then Chris has that attitude when it comes to these campaigns, which is super fun. One of the simpler ones that I'm hoping to have enough time to play the video of at the end is this campaign for family, which is Klim's rendition of ITC Clearface. So it's a very simple premise, and I'm not sure if subconsciously we were still dealing with the after effects of COVID and lockdown, but it's basically about the banalities of everyday life, So basic to-do list type stuff. The most mundane list of things that you would do, and half of you are like, yep, I do those things, I clean my bathroom, I have meetings, I check my mail, things like that. But the main thing we were doing with it was we're sort of having a laugh at the failures of how we go about daily life. Again, it sounds a lot like COVID to me. Whether it be overfeeding your cat to the point that their feet can't touch the ground, or an inability to get a full night's sleep, which is my problem at the moment, or just to keep your plants alive, which is an eternal struggle for me as well. So hopefully I'll have the time to play the video right at the very end. The most recent project that we released, which is released as recent as last week, is one called American Grotesque, which is Klim's rendition of Franklin Gothic. So, I don't know, I feel like Chris is going through a phase in the moment where he's just going through the classics and trying to outdo. It's like he's challenging, it's like trying to pick a fight with the, it's a bit like the recent fight with Tyson. It's like, who can I pick on? It's like a historical hero, and I'll fight him. It's like, I feel like he's going up against all these legends, right, in typography. And so in the conversation with Klim, Franklin Gothic, our sort of assertion or our opinion is that Franklin Gothic is as American as Helvetica is Swiss. So that's the kind of one of the propositions that lays the foundation for this project. And therefore we started looking at themes of Americana, and classic symbols of America. But also we looked at the history of Franklin Gothic and sort of noticed in a few instances the use of Franklin Gothic in persuasive speech. So when it's that bold, that strong, I feel like I believe it. I feel like if I read a statistic in Franklin Gothic, I go, that's true. Like that's true. So we were kind of playing with our own kind of interpretations of Americana and Franklin Gothic. So what we ended up doing was we decided to create a campaign entirely using generative AI tools. And this was a year ago. I was kind of bummed that it was only released recently because it was so difficult to do these a year ago. And now it's probably like, like I could do that in 5 minutes, But we were thinking about persuasive speech in America, and naturally you think about, like fake news stuff in the last 5 years, but then also all the recent stuff, about just the ethical dilemmas around Gen AI, and it's moving so fast, So in some ways, you're like, well, how do you have a conversation about America today without kind of talking about those two things? It's like, well, let's make that the premise of the campaign. So what we did was we generated the images and then we rephotographed them so that on 35mm film, so that it would essentially kind of add to the deception, but also complicates the copyright conversations. On the one hand, Gen AI images are copyright free. On the other hand, we own the copyright to our photos. So very complex. Not trying to find an answer to that, just seemed interesting at the time, And I guess we were inspired by things like Thibaut Kalman's Colors magazine in the 90s, which sort of deconstructed culture and used Franklin Gothic in the magazine. Also, satirical one-liners from Adbusters and also Saturday Night Live, right? So all of those things kind of adds to a very clumsy and sort of piss take of America from a non-American perspective, which I don't know if we've offended people. I'm just sort of reading the comments. Maybe they've been very quiet about it. So we were kind of like throwing out these gags, right? So this is obviously the American flag made out of bacon. A Southern Baptist minister baptizing a crocodile. Or the Marlboro man switching to vapes, from cigarettes. And I did, in my sort of hunt for, to see if there were any complaints or whatever in social media, I did find this comment, which is my favorite from the whole project. And I remember sharing it to Chris, and he's like, this guy gets it. Yeah. I was like, yeah. And so the cool thing about the Klim projects is that the rule that we've established with them is that every project can't be a repeat of the last project. So we've got to think of something new, a new theme, a new way of working, and we just have to reinvent it every time. So it's different every time. Segue to talking about differentiation. So this is the part that gets a bit lectury. I promise you that. So, for those of us that are dealing with marketers all the time, you're going to have the word differentiation probably in a brief at least twice. So marketers love having disruptive, attention-getting, standing out, and all that kind of stuff, right? Differentiation. So it's not like we disagree. We actually agree completely. We like that they're motivated to push us to find something new and interesting, right? Which is great. The only difference is that our reason for embracing differentiation is informed by completely different reasons. And it's sort of my own subjective reasons. And it's sort of, this is one of the sort of takeaways from my time when I was teaching at university. I was sort of interested in language and semiotics, and specifically Jacques Derrida's idea of difference. It's not a new idea. You probably did it in your undergrad. It's not a big deal, And but I guess the difference here is in some ways kind of trying to apply it in practice, So I think we all maybe read it, and that's interesting, and then we'll just go back to doing the things that we normally do, right? But and so so difference as an idea is essentially a play on French words. It means to differ or to defer. I'm trying to say that right. So basically, words have meaning because it's different from other words, but also those meanings could change depending on context. So you sort of end up postponing meaning. I think that's kind of what he meant. So for example, hot is meaningful because it's different from cold. But also, hot can shift in context. As we say, it's a hot day, it's a hot dude. It just shifts, right, depending on how we use it. So bastardizing Derrida and applying it to branding is, I guess, the hypothesis I was playing with, is that maybe in order to be meaningful, brands need to be different. Okay, that's the hypothesis. But also that we know that those meanings will change over time. Okay, so that's the sort of foundation of a lot of the work that we've been doing. And that means sometimes, in order to define what a brand is, we have to sort of consider what it's not, And sometimes it's stronger to actually understand these things are definitely not part of the brand, To show you a quick project called Deadly Ponies. I think you guys get Deadly Ponies. in Brisbane, I'm not sure. So I guess it's a fashion accessories, they do bags, they do shoes, a company based in New Zealand. And when we were working with them, they had sort of hit a little bit of a roadblock where I think they were doing really well in New Zealand, but I think people were struggling to understand them outside of New Zealand. And maybe in Australia was okay, because I think what's luxury in your own hometown isn't necessarily luxury when you're sitting in London or the Middle East, like it's just chalk and cheese, right? And so the previous identity was great for New Zealand, but didn't make sense outside of New Zealand. So we had to create a new identity so that it could do both, so that it still had a distinctive position, visually speaking, in New Zealand, but when you set it next to Hermes and Prada and somewhere else overseas, that it could stand out as being at least interesting, as opposed to simply just replicating the language of luxury from these fashion houses that are like hundreds of years old or whatever, and you feel like, do we even have a right to be using that kind of language? So we had to find our own kind of language. And what we did was, we decided to make a custom typeface, and we did it in collaboration with a really good friend of mine, a really good friend of the studio. His name is Seb McLaughlin. And basically what we did was we tried to put two things together that don't normally go together. So on one hand, looked at didones like Bodoni and the way that fonts work in vintage fashion magazines, but also really sort of workman-like humble office typewriter fonts like this IBM Selectric one, which to my knowledge has never been digitized. So we put it together, and we made a family of 5 weights, and essentially that's the sort of underlying system or structure that holds the brand identity. So along with doing photos and campaigns for them. So so I think it's sort of rewarding that even with the thousands and thousands and thousands of typefaces available in the world, that it was that we had enough of a vision to seek something out that we couldn't find, and when we couldn't find it, decided that we should make it. And so that makes it a very gratifying project. And sometimes I think I go looking for what seems like it might be implicitly wrong to do, judging by its relative absence in a particular category, in order to find an element of surprise. And maybe the element of surprise is also for myself, because I love good surprises. And one that we hope would be loved by our client's audience. I feel like I had to include this because this is like home ground advantage kind of thing, where this is a brand called Burley Gin, which is based next door to you in Burley Hits. And for this process, for this project, which involved again like branding and packaging and things like that, we decided to create a 1,000-page document containing all available gins for purchase in Australia. And we stopped at 1,000 pages because we got tired. Like it wasn't even capturing everything, right? And the reason we did that was A, we sort of needed to know what the landscape was like in Australia. And we were insane enough to try and do that. And secondly, the client was sort of relatively new to the industry. And so it felt like in order to have a meaningful conversation about what we wanted to do, we needed to sort of bring them up to speed. So we basically gave them a crash course in gin in Australia. And of course, by the time you get to the 60th, 70th page, and you see another dude with a martini on a barrel, like, you start to feel a bit sick, And so it had the desired effect, and then you're like, I totally see what you mean. We're not going here, So this methodology that we sometimes use, we almost call it like writing an anti-brief, of things that we're not going to do, and maybe it makes it more of a fun game. Maybe we're gamifying it for ourselves. But that's what we did with this project. So the logo, again, for a person that's not a Queensland native and going to Burley Heads for the first time, I couldn't help but notice those trees that sort of dot the coastline, by the shoreline, and they said, oh, that's the pandanus trees. I go, okay, the premise of the brand is very much about place. And so I go, well, we'll use that as your logo for Burley, which incidentally, the spelling Burley is in the original. Apparently, it's like one of the original spellings of it, or in one instance before it became the Burley with the E-I-G-H. And so that whole anti-brief thing, some of the rules in that I can remember were that we got from the document: no short bottles, because there were lots and lots of independent gins in Australia that I think probably due to like one totally boss supplier that was selling it to everybody. It's like they're all kind of like squat with rounded shoulders and stuff. So we're like, no short bottles was one of the rules. No photos and barrels, as I mentioned before. No distillery photos. And so I designed these bottles, and what I wanted was something that felt elegant, gentle, and with just soft curves that it felt to me like they were weathered by sort of, centuries of waves crashing into side of rocks or something like that for a long period of time. So I wanted to be special, but I definitely wanted to be humble, So we're not overstating it with too much use of gold, etc. It's only in the lid that we use a bit of gold. So restraint was very important to us because we wanted it to feel natural, like when like in this instance, you're in a picnic and you put it down. I didn't want it to feel out of place when you're in a social situation, in nature, in a landscape, to feel like it's sort of effortless. At least that was my vision for it. So, and then the choice of using like colored frosted bottles certainly felt very different for the category. But when I imagined my memory of that one time visiting Burleigh Heads when I was doing this project, and it was just the sun kissing you all day long. So I was like, well, if the bottle sort of looked like it's chilled in a way, like it sort of felt refreshing, having the bottle look a little bit frosted. So, and these are all kind of very unusual things in a gin space, and I'm quite, personally very, very chuffed that I think even the silhouette was sort of uncomfortable. People either love it or they absolutely hate it, which I'm actually okay with. And so the feeling, I guess, that we were driving for is one that I think makes a lot of sense for gin drinkers in Australia and New Zealand, which is that gin is sort of like our summer drink. I think of gin, I think of, just chilling out on the porch, of a flat, or we might have taken a picnic basket and things like that. So it's certainly not the old English, we think of beef eaters, and that seems very foreign to like an Australasian experience of drinking gin in the summer. So we're like, that makes sense to us. We want this brand to feel like summer. In fact, we want it to feel like the best summer holiday ever, right? And that was what we tried to do. And I guess in most of our branding projects, we're trying to find a balance at the intersection of these sort of four attributes. Different for different sakes, cool, but it's not really enough, right? It feels like you're just rebelling against something for the sake of it. But we're also thinking a lot about the value that we're offering our clients' customers, and we want them to value it and we want them to love it. So that's very important to us as well. It also has to be appropriate. Whether it's appropriate to the category, appropriate to whatever the context is, it's a sensitivity to, I guess, larger contexts that we're not in control of, And so this is going back to the invisible thing again. But most of all, more than anything else, it has to be true, And the number of times that as a young designer, I worked with an ad agency, and just the kind of, not that all agencies are like this, but but the few projects where I felt like their creative directors were happy to sort of skirt the truth and kind of move around it a bit. I was like, well, I think for us, truth is the superpower of a project. We just need to kind of go deeper to find the interesting thing that we need to make to activate it for use. And that's kind of the basis of this project here. I'll play you this sort of research. So this is a guy called Jeff Goodby. Basically, he was part of the agency that created the sort of infamous Got Milk campaign, which ran for like 25, 30 longer years. And in this video, he's talking about the main insight that was able to power that milk campaign, the world's most famous milk campaign, for 25, 30 years.
When we first worked on it, the people at my company ran the other way. It was the most boring product in the world. 100% penetration. Everybody's got it. Everybody knows as much as they want to know about it.
Everyone's familiar with the product.
It's not very funny.
Yeah.
Luckily, some woman at a focus group that we did said the only time I ever even notice milk is if I run out of it. And we kind of made 25 years of advertising around that sentence.
That worked pretty well.
So, funnily enough, we didn't actually find that video until after we completed the project. But we knew the truth of it because we were trying to work out names for it. And in a sort of moment of honesty, I remember standing outside our studio with my friend Sam, who actually writes all the copy, and I actually roped him into, he's the one that's in this video you're about to see. And that moment of honesty, I said to him, honestly, bro, I'm finding this project so boring. And as that thought left my mouth, so I just sort of just reached it. I was like, grabbed it. I thought, what if we called it boring? And suddenly, ironically, it turned it around to become very, very interesting, And so that's what we did. So I'll play you this, I guess this brand video, which has the brand story written, used for the script.
As the best supporting actor in cereal, tea, and coffee, milk is essential, but who gets excited about milk? This oat milk isn't particularly riveting either. It's boringly similar to regular milk, but without the actual milking bit. It doesn't even come from anywhere fancy like overseas. It's made in New Zealand with New Zealand oats. Consistently excellent, trustworthy, and dependable. The only way this oat milk could be more boring would be if we called it just that. Boring oat milk made in New Zealand with New Zealand oats.
Yeah. So it's a really good example of, when we stumble upon the truth of the product or the category, and then we just named it that, right? And so when we were talking to a client, Morgan, she loved it straight away. Everyone else in her company hated it. So the investors are like, you should change it. What if you call it something else? Well, they were trying to brainstorm. Maybe it should be pink instead of that terrible green you're using. Maybe you should call it. What are some other names that are like boring but not boring, like dull? Well, no, that's terrible. And so they were just trying so hard to change it, right? So to the point where at one stage Morgan was like, I love it. We're going to stop showing it to people, and we're just going to launch it, right? And so luckily, when it launched in the first year, it became the #1 oat milk in New Zealand. So all the sort of naysayers had to kind of be quiet. So that's fine. So we're like, look, it works, it's fine. So, but everyone was very scared. I actually, to be honest, I was nervous that I was doing them a disservice by exploring this idea, because like, what if it fails? I was losing a tiny bit of sleep about it. But similar to the Burley project, the whole anti-brief thing, was the process we use here as well. So, so we had our own kind of our not list, right? And our not list included no illustrations, no, we had a list of colors we weren't supposed to use, no extroversion, and so we chose colors like boring sage green and cream, and even the choice of container, this sort of PET plastic with a sleeve on it, which amazingly enough, Morgan had done all this research about sustainability, and she's like, in New Zealand, they're all terrible options, but if we go with PET plastic, at least it has a chance of being recycled. Tetra Pak, which has cardboard bonded with aluminum or metals and bonded with plastic, we don't have the infrastructure. So without fail, it will go in landfill, right? So she sort of risked, ruffling feathers of people at a time when people were doing these no plastic months and things like that, So it just kind of blanket no plastic. But to her credit, she looked into the nuances of what would actually be better from the not so great options, and she went with that. But then on the positive is that when you go down the supermarket aisle into the oat milk section, it's the only one that is in a bottle, So it literally is the most alien thing, which still gives me great joy to go down there. I still take pictures of it for no reason, like a proud dad. You're like, oh, look at you, and so naturally, when you create a brand premise that's fun and fertile, we had a lot of fun then doing a lot of communications and stuff, and I won't have time to show you all of them. But even when we have to literally give you boring lists of credentials, instead of trying to spin a copy on it, we just give each other a list, and then we just add a little gag right at the very bottom, And that's sort of like the development of this personality where it's really, really dry, and we always just kind of like, we'll have little witty games and gags where possible. So that includes, for a billboard that would probably be seen by people in rush hour traffic. Boring, it's pretty good. And then, other gags are like things like, the something is boring. We just sort of use it a lot. This is the card that accompanies your pack if you buy oat milk from them directly, like online, and they'll just give you an actual customer service card. I was like, maybe you should get an 0800 number. It'd be kind of funny. I'm not sure who will ring you. Like, we have no reason, but just do it. So, okay, cool. We'll just do that. And of course, also one of the things I learned from a long time of working with startups is that I think too many designers think that a company is successful because of, we did a great brand and things like that, right? And over the years, working so closely with entrepreneurs, it's like all the sort of soldiers that are invisible, like the salespeople, like all the hard yards that are gained while, creatives sit in an ivory tower pumping out campaigns, thinking that's the thing that does the difference, And we know better in that we can support the people that are doing that work by giving them tools that would make their job a bit easier. In this case, giving baristas a t-shirt that says making coffee is boring is probably going to open up a conversation about oat milk. So I guess ultimately, for all the heady existential questioning and the journey that I've just taken you guys through, the biggest takeaway for me from that period of my life and discovering refocusing and things like that is actually then using Diane's method on myself, And basically, I figured out the thing that makes me get up out of bed in the morning, and that is that I love connecting like a maker of something with a receiver of something, so to speak, and sort of create like almost like a fan, like a producer and fan relationship, right? So that was kind of like what I loved about the music industry and the film industry, and it wasn't until I understood this that I thought, well, if I'm going to do branding projects, what if I just take something that feels really natural for me and apply it to this world, and we will only do it on that basis, That if we can empathize with the audience and want to serve that audience, then we know that's the project for us, So on that basis, we say no to like, law firm annual reports and things like that because I just can't empathize, Like I'm sure someone would do a really good job of it, it just wouldn't be us, Because unfortunately, my team kind of feel the same way. And so it's very hard to motivate them when they don't believe in something, which is cool, right? And so in some ways, a spirit of generosity is a thing that kind of powers everything and it overrides almost everything I've just said, and that's the most important thing. And in some ways, the theme of the talk, which is the desire to find the right kind of wrong, is really a desire to surprise and delight, and sort of not following the rules of the game, not doing what everyone else does, maybe gives you and me as consumers or customers the chance to find something that we didn't know that we wanted. So yeah, so that concludes my talk. I will just formally thank again the TDC team for having me. I really love being here, and thank you for listening to my lecture. I'm gonna now play the. Can I play this 3-minute video? Cool. This is the Klim family campaign. So enjoy. Thank you.
Three, two, 3, 2.
blah 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 blah.